to the second part of ISA's three-part video series on the Kisan protests in India. The Kisan protests began across North India late last year in response to three farm bills that were passed by the Indian government in September of 2020. Since then, farmer unions and various representatives have demanded that the laws be repealed. The protests have expanded across the globe in various South Asian communities. ISA-UMN believes that it is important to understand the situation through an educational lens and support the communities that are affected.
Our second speaker in this three-part series is Ms. Meenakshi Ganguly. Ms. Ganguly is the South Asian Director at the Human Rights Watch, overseeing the organization's work in the region. Ms. Ganguly has worked on a broad range of issues, including police reform, sexual violence, discrimination based on religion or caste, freedom of expression, and armed conflict. In India, she has researched abuses surrounding the sectarian riots in Gujarat, the lack of injustice in Punjab, issues of religious freedom, the failure to protect India's vulnerable communities, including those affected by the Maoist conflict and abuses related to the fighting in the states of Manipur and Jammu and Kashmir.
She has also advocated for the protection of women and children from violence, including sexual abuse, and for a human rights approach to India's foreign policy. Today, Ms. Ganguly will be speaking about the right to peaceful dissent and the impact the Farm Bill have on the farmers that are protesting. Please welcome Ms. Meenakshi Ganguly.
So the protest began in November, soon after the Indian government enacted laws that were directed at reforming farming practices, particularly procurement of agricultural products. A lot of the farmers felt that this was going to impact their livelihood. One of the things that did happen was that these laws were not argued. Usually in a way that these processes work in India is that there is a debate in Parliament. Often, then the parliamentary committee set up, which consults with stakeholders. And one of the things that has happened here is that the farmers feel they weren't consulted enough to put out their particular concerns about how these reforms will take place. It has been largely a peaceful protest, except on January 26th. On January 26th, which is India's Republic Day, the police allowed the farmers to have their parallel tractor rally in the capital. So they were allowed to come in. They had the permission. However, some farmers broke through barriers, altered the routes that had been approved by the police, and eventually ended up at the Red Fort, which is a significant space and a historic monument in the middle of Delhi, where they raised a flag, which is a symbol of Sikhs. It was a Sikh protester who did that. From what we can gather, by and large, the police did exercise complete restraint in containing these protests where they turned violent. There are concerns about one person that died, but the police also say that hundreds of their personnel were injured in these clashes. Well, the concerns really are about the broader issue of economic social rights. So, when so many people protest, then the responsibility of the state is to try and engage in some conversation, to try and determine what the concerns are and try and address them. Because this is at its most right to livelihood concern, and that has to be addressed in some way. Unfortunately, the response has largely been a political one, as in that these are motivated protests, and that is something that the Supreme Court has also weighed in on, saying that you cannot have this, and you must address what the farmers are worried about. In terms of use of force and so on, the right to peaceful protest, by and large, the government has upheld that because these people farmers have been protesting peacefully. They have not been allowed to enter the capital, but they have been sitting outside. There have been some incidents where supporters of the ruling party, of the BJP, have engaged in some violence, which is very concerning for us because that's not always state action but non-state action, and it can escalate very quickly into violence. But that seems to have been contained now. And then there is the last thing, which is that the clashes that occurred in Delhi on January 26th. One person died. The family of that person says that he died of gunshot injuries or because of police action. The police have denied it. The reason that we are worried about that particular incident is because journalists that reported the claims of family members that he had died not of speeding. What happened was that his tractor sped up and then overturned and he was killed. Now, what led to the tractor speeding up is more. The one party says that it was he had an injury. The other said that he was just speeding and lost control of his tractor. But regardless, as a journalist, you do report all claims. However, in this particular case, what has happened is that when journalists reported this, the state has filed cases against those journalists, which is why it's concerning, because you cannot punish journalists for doing their job if they have objective reporting, which also presents all sides of the story. So it's interesting because the protests began in November and have continued until now, as we are now in March. So this is a long time that these people have been sitting really away from their homes. They've traveled away from their homes. And the media reporting has, to a large part, subsided because other stories take over. It would be really unfortunate if so many hundreds of thousands of farmers are not heard. And for that, of course, you do require the media, because if you don't have the media, then it becomes a problem. One of the reasons that the farmers' protests drew international attention, interestingly, was at a time when there was a pop star called Rihanna, a US pop star, who talked about how she sort of cited a news article about how internet had been closed in these areas and asked why people were not talking about it. It was just, it was not a political statement. But it drew attention to this situation where the farmers where farmers were being denied at that point of time internet access. It led, of course, to a lot of attention. And it followed by a lot of other celebrities, international celebrities, also speaking to this. So in a way, the farmers' issue left the sort of the narrow confines of this particular law and what happened, and became more about farmers protesting. And the government reacted very poorly to this. And that really is one of the concerning things that we are seeing right now, that a government that enjoys a massive mandate is extremely popular, the leadership is particularly popular, tends to get so anxious when there are questions that are raised. In a democracy, questions have to be raised. Certainly questions have to be raised when so many people are protesting about something and are peacefully demanding that they be heard. Now, the reaction from the state was quite extraordinary. We've never seen that a foreign ministry, the foreign ministry responding to some social media comment from celebrities. And what was worse was that a lot of younger people in India have been inspired by Greta Thunberg's movement and have started speaking about climate. And one of those activists was a young woman called Disha Ravi, who was also working on trying to generate support for the farmers and shared what is often used, which is a toolkit, a Google document, which talks about how people around the world can on social media support a particular movement. This is not an unusual thing. A lot of social media campaigns are run like this. But in this particular case, the government decided to treat this as a conspiracy, and she was arrested. This was extremely concerning, because at a time when the Indian government supports climate activism, has said that as part of its policy, it wants to address the very serious challenges around climate. To pick on somebody for a toolkit and to suggest for some reason that this toolkit was a conspiracy against the state was quite extraordinary. And that is what the judges eventually found when they granted bail to her. But it still has had a very chilling effect. I mean, we hear from parents of young people, who have been involved, younger people who have been involved in this sort of climate activism. Their parents are now worried, and they are saying, "Oh, please don't do this. Please don't be vocal on social media." So there is a chilling effect on one of the most key issues that impacts our future, and therefore the future of younger people, because in a weird way, the impact of climate is going to come upon a generation that is now still very young or in university, are young adults, and they need to care about this, and to try and subside their concerns would be very, very unfortunate. At this point of time, the farmers are asking for a repeal of the law. We, as human rights activists, don't really take a position on legislation, but we do want to want the government to uphold the right to peaceful association and to eventually end these conflict situations. The government had said that it will put a stay on this, will not enforce this law for some time while it sort of sorts it out. Perhaps there is a lack of trust between the protesting farmers and the government, and that is something for the state to resolve. In the end, it is for the state to resolve differences instead of accusing protesters of, again, having ulterior motives like maligning the state, of affiliating with separatist groups in the diaspora community, which are all things that have been said. So it undermines what the farmers are possibly seeking, which is their right to life. So the way that the BJP, which is in power right now, has run its political campaign has often been to promote the rights of the majority Hindu community in India. Now, what that does is therefore almost immediately put at risk the minority communities. So in 2019, the government enacted something called the Citizenship Amendment Law. It was a law that provides fast tracks asylum claims of minority communities from the neighboring countries, from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And it basically said that it would fast track the claims of non-Muslims. It was 6 other religions. Muslims were the most prominent excluded community. And what that did was it led to a lot of protests because it violated the Constitution of India, which does not discriminate on the basis of religion. So to exclude a particular group seemed discriminatory, and people protested about it. And then, of course, bookended on the other side by the farmers, which almost happened 1 year later. Now, in both of these, and when the farmers protested, a lot of them were from Punjab, and at that point, Sikhs, the farmers were accused of affiliating with Sikh separatist groups. While when the citizenship law was being protested, there were a lot of people who were Muslim, because it was going to impact Muslims after all, and so therefore they were then targeted. It was Muslims that were being criticized. Now that's 2 major minority religious groups in India. Around the farmers' protests have also been Dalit groups, work labor unions, who have also been protesting. And 2 Dalit labor rights activists were taken into custody. Both say that they were ill-treated in custody. So therefore, we have to start worrying about how the government is going to respond to a very diverse nation. And it is something that is celebrated often about India, that India is diverse. It has actually managed to celebrate its own diversity, and it has been rich for it. And to now start really suggesting that any particular minority group, whether it's a Dalit group or it's a Sikh group or it's a Muslim group, if they are going to be then attacked for their particular identity and being accused of being anti-national, that undermines the whole idea of an inclusive and diverse India, which has long been celebrated. So it's interesting that you asked that. In India, a lot of the farming is done by women, often because land holdings become small and the men of the family tend to travel to cities for other jobs. So farming is often done by women. And so when we speak of farmer, we should not think only man. We should also think of women because women farm. And therefore they have agency and on what decisions are being made. So therefore, a lot of the protests that have occurred around the farm laws have also, women have joined those protests. One of the things that happened, however, was that when the Supreme Court was hearing the petitions from farmers, they said, "Oh, why are women here? It's so cold." It was in the winter in North India, which is very severe. And then why are women being brought and we're putting them at risk? Which might have come from concern, but it undermined yet again the fact that women have a voice, have a right, and should be part of any decision-making process. And this is something that we face often in discourse around rights in India, where somehow even now men choose to speak for the rights of women. So men will say that rapists should be hanged. Men will say, "Oh, we should have better, women should perhaps not take chances of stepping out in public spaces at night because they're going to be put at risk of some sort of abuse." This culture where women are not given agency, and even when they're being spoken about by men, has to change. There are very, very active women in India. Women have been part of the freedom struggle. Women have a very good voice, strong voice on a lot of rights issues, and this sort of approach to try and speak for women really needs to change. Yesterday I was in a clubhouse conversation about some of how we are being informed right now. And it's because social media has actually changed how we are informed. There's a lot of noise. Most people don't know. And they tend, therefore, to occupy their own echo chambers. So what happens is that they belong to a WhatsApp group. And that WhatsApp group, if they have a certain political ideology, will forward only that material to them. Now, what happens, therefore, is one of the things that we faced during COVID, when the COVID crisis hit, was suddenly a lot of family members were receiving all these WhatsApp forwards suggesting that Muslims were the reason that COVID was spreading, that Muslim vendors were spitting on vegetables. It was bizarre. And of course, then it was backed by a lot of pro-government television networks that were shouting about Corona Jihad and such like. Now, it does two things. One, it creates, yet again, divisions between communities, false divisions between communities. But more importantly, what it risked was that when Muslims were being targeted in that way, they would probably not even report symptoms because they would be so scared of being accused of spreading the disease. So, in a pandemic situation, when you start targeting a certain community, it actually hurts everybody in the end. This is a deeply infectious virus, and by sort of singling out one particular community and blaming them, you are basically pushing them underground. So, we have to understand that it is often attractive for people to hate other people. It's a thing that works, and particularly when they are almost always being made to feel the persecuted one. Why is it that, Muslims are doing this or Christians are doing that or the Sikhs are doing this and, they are violent and we've been subjected to colonial rule or Muslim invasions. These are things that Indian families often hear. And they imagine that they are righting a wrong by targeting minority groups right now. And they believe that, and this is not just in India, we're seeing this across the board. I mean, this is exactly what happened in the US and the narrative, the political narrative that brought President Trump to power was also this. It was going after insecurities and anxieties that majority groups feel, and then trying somehow to suggest that by having this particular individual or leadership in office, those would be solved. They cannot be solved. So is there cause for disaffection amongst majority communities? Of course. When economies are struggling, there are no jobs. When there are no jobs, people get upset about it. That is happening in the US, it's happening in India, it's happening elsewhere as well. But then the idea is to solve the problem and not keep looking for someone easy to blame. When people teach you to blame somebody else, that's because they don't know how to solve the problem. So your leaders should know that they have to solve a problem. They can't keep pointing fingers at other people. Most obviously, I'll have to say it's because this generation didn't do a very good job of it. You know, we came to human rights as at the end of a brutal world war, a genocide, the killing of so many people. And I think at that point, the world stopped and said, never again. That is what led to this commitment to human rights. A lot of people believe that it's a Western concept. It's not. You know, even if you look at religious text, you will find that it's almost always the same principles. What is it eventually? It is to be respectful of someone else. It is to uphold the right to life and liberty of somebody else. It's not an extraordinary thing. But I think from the time that the Universal Declaration was adopted to where we are today, it's been a very short span where that same rhetoric of hate seems to be impacting large sections of the people. And therefore, I have to say that, you know, we didn't do the right thing by the next generation. You as student leaders, you as students, you as the inheritors of all of this will have to solve it. I would only want to say that just like this is a protest, there have been protests everywhere. We are seeing protests in Myanmar, we're seeing protests in Hong Kong, and we've also seen states crack down on these protests. Build support, build solidarity. Often when these protests occur, they occur for survival of a certain principle of equality and liberty and freedom. It is for everybody that says to you that these are Western concepts, they're not, because these are principally things that human beings want. Sometimes they find that they're in conflict with somebody else who wants that same thing, and therefore there are disagreements. Those disagreements have to be solved, but not through violence. And therefore, one of the things that is very important is for everybody to try and listen to somebody else. So it isn't no conversation, particularly in universities where when I speak, I often find that, you know, the room becomes divided quite often, particularly, you know, on a particular issue. So one group will not even speak to each other. They will start shouting. They will say things like, oh, well, you know, you don't like so-and-so, you're targeting such and such, he's my hero. It has to stop. This has to stop because being stuck in a particular way of thinking, which is whether it's liberal or illiberal, eventually there has to be a middle ground. So, you know, there has to be conversations. If I'm considered a liberal, I have to listen and take into account what the concerns are about from people that disagree with me, as much as they have to listen to why I disagree with them. Only then will we come to a solution.